The emotional subconscious. So now you know that stress is a reaction in the brain caused by the fear and flight response to emotional stimuli. Stress hormones are released into the bloodstream, your thinking brain gets bypassed, and your emotional brain takes over. Let's have a look at why this action takes place, why it takes place in some people and not in others. The emotional subconscious. Now, the emotional subconscious contains our emotional memories, and they are imprinted on the amygdala, the emotional brain. From a neurological perspective, scientists have determined that human emotional responses take place in the amygdala and hippocampus areas of the brain. However, this is a physical analysis, and it shows us the effect that our feelings exercise over our physical body. The emotional subconscious goes beyond the material construction of the brain and offers a deeper understanding of the role that our emotions play in all aspects of our lives. In clinical practice, it became clear to me that many of my clients couldn't stop themselves from following certain emotional patterns, almost as if they had been pre-programmed like a computer. Nothing demonstrated this more clearly than those who were suffering from various addictions. Their lives were being controlled and directed against their will, and they were locked into a way of behaving that they knew was harmful but were unable to escape from. Now that's the emotional subconscious, both mental and emotional. You can sum it up in a few words: habits, learned behavior. For instance, hundreds of activities in our daily lives are processed by the subconscious mind. We simply don't have to think about it. A good example is driving a car. We no longer have to consciously control the movement of our feet and hands in order to change gears. It was only when we were learning to drive that the delicate act of coordination required our conscious attention. While changing gear, a driver focuses on the road, the signs, other cars and pedestrians, because the act of changing gear has become embedded in the subconscious mind. Subconscious acts such as this are activated by circumstances. In the case of changing gear, the foot movements required are only called upon when we are driving a car. It would be unusual to observe somebody mimicking the actions of changing a gear at the dinner table or even in the back seat of a car. Now, this is just one procedure among thousands that are stored in our subconscious, ready to be recalled when needed. We accrue them over a period of time, going back to childhood, and use them all the time. Walking, running, riding a bike, breathing. None of these actions require conscious thought from our conscious mind. The emotional subconscious functions in a similar way to the mental subconscious. We store emotional information from the experiences of emotional interreactions and situations. When you were born, your emotional subconscious is pretty much a blank sheet. It then builds up an internal database which forms the basis for your subsequent emotional behavior throughout your life. You are continually building and expanding this base of emotional experiences. The formation of the emotional subconscious is critical during the first 7 years of life, since so many influential experiences are taking place. For the first 2 years of life, a child is primarily affected by the emotional profile of parents, family, and those who they come into daily contact with. It is the people who come into direct physical contact with an infant who have the most influence on their emotional state and the formation of their emotional subconscious. That is because the child can feel the emotion of an adult, just like when somebody picks up a baby and it cries if that person is feeling anxious. I mean, before I had children myself, I picked up friends' babies and they cried because I was anxious that I would drop them. But then once I learned how to hold a baby and was confident that the head was not going to fall off, I got more relaxed about it. But it was scary the first time. We carry subconscious responses from babyhood to childhood and from teenage years into adulthood. Consequently, when inappropriate emotional behavior has seeded itself in the emotional subconscious of a child, it will inevitably flower years later in their emotional behavior as an adult. Inappropriate emotional conditioning during childhood can set up the conditions for stress in adult life. Now let's examine a stressful situation in the workplace where belligerent, unkind boss is constantly harassing and bullying one of the employees, why does the boss pick on that person and not somebody else? Often without knowing anything of the victim's personal history, the boss is somehow able to target his prey. It's as if the employee has a message written on their forehead saying, "Here I am, bully me." The boss knows he can dish out the bullying, while the employee allows it to happen. This is a subconscious emotional relationship. People who are subjected to this kind of bullying are acutely aware from a conscious perspective that it is undesirable and unhealthy. What they are not able to do is to stand up for themselves, and that is because their emotional subconscious is acting on their behalf. How many times have you been in a situation where you later regretted the way you responded? You think to yourself, why didn't I fight back? If only I had said something. Only if I had said or done something different. Or why didn't I say what I had planned to say? These are familiar examples of the power of the emotional subconscious to govern your actions against your will. In these cases, your response occurs before you have time to think. It is taken out of your hands. For a short but crucial period of time, you have lost control over what you are doing or saying. You have lost control of your thinking mind. Later on, when you're alone and uninterrupted, you may reflect on those incidents to try and make sense of your reaction. It's quite common to feel frustrated, disappointed, even guilty or ashamed afterwards. It doesn't matter how many times you mentally resolve to respond more robustly in the future, you surrender over and over again. Now, caught up in this cycle, many people eventually capitulate altogether. They simply accept the harmful consequences of stressful environments as something they must learn to live with. Somebody who is continually vulnerable to the stressful reactions triggered by their emotional subconscious will eventually become ill, develop an eating disorder, or become increasingly depressed. The emotional subconscious exercises a far more powerful control over our daily actions than we realize. It is present in almost every single emotional interaction that we have with everyone we meet and come into contact with. It's like a trap door that lets stress into the human body. You need to stop this trap door from opening, and you can when you learn the LSR technique. Now let's take another common example. Let's take questions that require a simple yes or no answer. These are perfect examples of conscious intentions being undermined by strong, subconscious, emotional patterning. Some people have terrible difficulty saying no, even when they know that they want to. Yes and no are both monosyllabic words, both very easy to pronounce and almost impossible to confuse. Yes, no. If you need to say no, you would think it an incredibly simple task. So what stops people from saying it when they need to? The emotional subconscious. Is that what stops them? The emotion of the situation activates the stored emotional responses and effectively takes you over. The conscious mind will later tell you that you should have said no, and yet in that split second you undermine all your conscious thought by agreeing and saying yes. Highly charged emotional situations will always impair your ability to think. If your stress switch goes off, you actually lose your ability to think. I have a friend whose life was constantly made more complicated because of her inability to say no. She would make several arrangements for the same time with different people. Having done this, she was then forced with having to cancel many of her social appointments and disappointing her friends. This leads to stressful situations. The subconscious emotional response which stopped her ever saying no was creating impractical dilemmas for her. She couldn't be in two places at the same time. She knew she had to let people down, and the prospect of that made her agitated. Of course, she was forced to pick up the phone and confront the same situation she had avoided in the first place, saying no. Somewhere in her emotional subconscious there was corrupt information, which was distorting the way she reacted to any situation that required confrontation. This is just one example. There are many instances where stress situations are created by the workings of the emotional subconscious. Another common manifestation is the withdrawal from honest expression. We are often presented with the opportunity to speak openly and truthfully about our feelings for a person or about a situation. And we frequently decline that opportunity because our subconscious reaction closes the door on our better intentions. If we understand the workings of the emotional subconscious and how it affects us overall, then we can use this to evict many harmful emotional patterns that affect our bodies and our state of health. It is by identifying the corrupt emotional templates we have stored inside us that allows us to stop their progression and make the difference between health and illness. But how do we stop the emotional response from taking place? As we know, it all comes down to a single moment in time, the stress trigger. This moment continually occurs in our everyday life. It is often over before we realize that it has occurred, and we often allow it to exercise an invisible control over our bodies without realizing that it exists. But once we learn how to capture this moment, then we can stop the harmful effects of stress from entering the body.